Good enough. Thank you, Marco. Welcome back. The day's been a wonderful day with great presentations. And started out with a talk about the environment saving the world. As I explained to you, my only interest in medicine 40 years ago, or in this whole food thing, was to saving somebody from diabetes or heart attack or breast cancer. That's all I really cared about. And I was blind to the issues of animal suffering. I'm really totally blind. People would come up to me and tell me stories, and I'd go, well, it's not my business. And it was the same thing with the environment. What do I have to do with the environment? It's not my business. But things have changed. Maybe since I've become a grandfather, I have 7 grandkids. Maybe I think there should be a future. But for whatever reason, I have the opportunity to have 2 ecologists to talk to us at this presentation. And maybe I'll have 4. Maybe I'll be known as the ecological conference and an environmental conference, and I won't even think I'm a doctor anymore, and who knows. But I think the subject is paramount. And the most important subject is how to save the world. And give us some breathing room so we can put solar panels on the roofs and all figure out how we can all own Teslas. And so we need people like our next guest, an ecologist from Oregon Oregon State University, who spent his life with passion trying to help the world sustain itself. And I'd like to welcome Dr. William Ripple to give us his important points of view.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it. Well, it's great to be with you this afternoon. And we're going to cover a lot of miles this afternoon. We're going to start in South Dakota, go to Oregon, and go around the world. I'm going to talk today about the topic, environmental effects of human carnivory. Now, you may be asking yourself, well, what is human carnivory? Well, it's basically humans eating animals. So I'll use these terms interchangeably, eating meat, eating animals, human carnivory. You're going to hear that a lot in this talk. I'm going to take you on a travelogue of my personal research over the last 20 years as an ecologist. We're going to go lots of places. 20 years ago, I started in Yellowstone National Park. Then we're going to go on and look at the largest carnivores and herbivores in the world. We're going to look at the bushmeat crisis, climate change, Heart Mountain National Wildlife Refuge, and we're going to end with this topic of environmental nutrition. Now, all of these topics are interrelated, and they all have to deal with human carnivory and ecology. So hold on to your seats, and we're going to take off. We're going to talk about biodiversity conservation, the interconnectedness of nature. As an ecologist, I want to understand how nature works. Like, it just drives me. It's a passion. It's a never-ending mystery. Well, biodiversity conservation is all about preserving the variety of different wild plant and animal species on Earth. That's the definition. Wild species play important roles, and when we remove one, there can be these cascading effects. So I want you to keep your eye out on the interconnections that we're going to look at today. I've been fortunate to be able to work with over 50 scientists from many nations around the world on a number of projects. And the projects I'm going to show you today, these are my collaborators. And it's just been very humbling to work with such great scientists. Well, let's start off in South Dakota. I was born into a ranching farming family. South Dakota, there's me, age 5. I'm on my horse Trixie. There's my dad with his cattle. I've spent my entire professional career at Oregon State University. I've been there for over 30 years. Okay, part one, the Yellowstone aspen mystery. 1996, I went out to Yellowstone and we saw the aspen trees dying out. See, there's big ones and they're dying, but there's no small trees. Why would that be? So, my grad student and I did a tree ring study. So we drilled into the trees and we counted the rings. So you can see here, you can age the trees by counting the rings. So this kind of coring can provide insights into the dynamics of aspen ecology. So the scientists didn't know why the aspen were dying out, but I can give you a clue. It has to do with the diet patterns of the humans. Maybe the meat eating by the humans. Now how could that be? Diet affecting trees? Wolves were killed off in 1926 to protect the livestock and to safeguard the wild game for hunters to kill and eat. So, ranching is king, hunting for meat is king. The wolves and other predators are considered competitors to the humans. So now are you starting to get it? We're going to look at a theory called trophic cascades. That's where the predator affects the prey, affects the plants. Therefore, indirectly, the predator affects the plants. This is the wolf. It preys on the elk. The elk eats the sprouts of the young trees as they come out of the ground. So therefore, indirectly, the wolves affect the aspen trees. Now, trophic cascades is kind of a technical term, and a lot of you may not be familiar with it. So I have a solution for you, because I think you'll probably forget this term when you go home. Just think about the ripple effect. Well, without the wolves, the elk ate themselves out of house and home. The trees stopped regenerating, and the biodiversity declined. Well, this is starting to look like a barnyard to me, where these large herbivores don't have their predator, their native predator, and they're just browsing down the young sprouts on the trees and the bushes. Well, the federal government decided they were wrong in killing off the wolves in the 1920s. So in their wisdom, they brought the wolves back in 1995 and 96. So this creates what's called a natural experiment. Because if our hypothesis on trophic cascades is right, those plants should start growing again. So some of you might remember Bruce Babbitt, Secretary of Interior, that helped carry wolves back into Yellowstone in '95. We asked the question, will plant communities begin to recover following the reintroduction of wolves? Cottonwoods, willow, aspen, berry-producing shrubs, are they going to do better? Well, the wolves did their job. They're natural carnivores. They eat meat and stay healthy. A little bit different than what we're hearing from the health professionals here. This is my Grand Flamingo Hotel for the last 20 years in Yellowstone. It was built in the 1800s, and it is so small and short that you have to duck when you go in. At least I do. Here I am working with my colleague, Dr. Beshta. So we would go out and measure the aspen and the willow during the day, and then we are so charged up we would plot it up in Excel at night in this little log cabin. Let's look at some results. 1997, these are the willows, which you can't really see, along Soda Butte Creek in northern Yellowstone. 2001, predator-prey plant. The willows are growing taller here by 2001. Just look at the next one. 2010, look at how tall they're getting. That's what we want to see in the floodplains. Lots of willow habitat, taller and denser. 2001, 2010. Aspen's doing better. By 2006, the aspen started pushing up above the grasses here next to me. By 2010, you can barely see me in this field of aspen coming up under these trees. These are the big old aspen trees that grew up in the 1800s when wolves were present. No regeneration of aspen during the wolf-free period, and now wolves are back. Aspen's recruiting again. Is this a howling success? Or are we jumping for joy? Yes, but there's more. It even gets better. Wolves are good for beaver. With the additional willow growth, the beaver came back because they need willow to eat and build their dams. Wolves are good for bears. Berry-producing shrubs grew taller, produced more berries. So now there's more bears in Yellowstone. Wolves are good for scavengers. The wolves bring down their prey year-round, so there's carcasses on the ground for the scavengers. Wolves are good for moose. Moose need willows, and there are a lot more willows now. Wolves are good for songbirds because the birds need the willows and the aspen habitat. Wolves are good for sheep. Okay, I need to stop the slideshow and tell you that this is not a real picture. This is photoshopped, I confess. But seriously, wolves could be good for sheep. It's my hypothesis that wolves control coyotes, coyotes take sheep. They take thousands of sheep in the northern Rockies every year. So as a theory, wolves might be good for sheep. So a key point about the Yellowstone is that wolves, which are ecologically important, have been persecuted because of human carnivory. Now we're going to move along to part two, the largest carnivores and herbivores. Lions and tigers and bears, oh my. Do you remember that movie? How many people had that as a favorite kids movie? Wasn't it great? Well, more seriously, these large predators are persecuted all around the world to protect livestock and wild game. So they're a victim of human carnivory. These are things you probably haven't thought of before, but these wild predators are very important for ecosystems. 19 threatened large carnivores, includes a whole list of bears, canids, felids, otters. Let's take the tiger, for example. In 1970, there were 40,000 tigers. Today, there's 3,200. It is critically endangered, and we are on the brink of losing the tiger forever. Humans consume tiger parts as traditional medicine, bone, hair, teeth. Humans kill the prey of the tiger, so the tiger doesn't have enough to eat. Humans affect the habitat of the tiger. Well, let's move around the world to the other side. We just left Southeast Asia, now we're moving into Australia. There's the dingo in Australia. It is the cousin of the gray wolf. Dingoes sometimes take calves or sheep, so they're persecuted. This is what the ranchers think of dingoes. Let's go over to Africa. The African lion. Take a look here. The historic range is in light brown, the current range in dark brown. So the lion has lost the majority of its range. It disappeared mostly due to persecution by humans to protect livestock. Lions have very important ecological roles. Lions keep baboons in check. When we lose the lions, we have these major increases in baboon numbers. Baboons will be raiding the farmers' crops, spreading diseases to humans, and doing a number on their native prey. It's so bad in some parts of Africa where lions have been lost that the farmers keep their kids home from school to stand guard over the fields to keep the baboons away. Well, we published this work in Science Magazine in 2014 on the largest carnivores. So I was so intrigued with the world's largest carnivores, I headed up this project about the world's largest herbivores. These are large mammals greater than 100 kilograms, that's about 220 pounds, and they eat mostly plants. Well, we found out that 44 of the 74 largest herbivores are threatened with extinction. 12 critically endangered or extinct in the wild. Here is the list of the endangered. The bovids, one camel, the deer species, both elephant species, the horses, the hippos, the great apes, the rhinos, the wild pigs, the tapirs. This was shocking to see this many species endangered. This is a map showing the locations of where those threatened species live on Earth. Let's take the African elephant, for example. In blue is the historic range, red, the current range. Well, that's not much left. Same for the hippo, not much left. And it's even worse for the black rhino. Look at those little red polygons. There's so much poaching on the rhino today that I decided to trick the poachers when I published this map, and I jiggled all these polygons. I moved this one from down here up to there because I didn't want to give them any clues where these last black rhinos live. Let's look at the threats to the largest herbivores. On the y-axis here, we have percent of the large herbivore species. On the x, the different threats. These add up to more than 100% because each species has more than one threat. Well, the biggest threat is hunting for meat. Large herbivores are sought after for their meat. Hunting for body parts, livestock competition, livestock disease, hybridized with livestock. The first 5 threats here all have to do with human carnivory. The rest of them have to do with land use and habitat. Rhino horns are consumed as traditional medicine. They're ground up into a powder. They're so expensive now, they cost more by weight than pure gold. And with this high price on the rhino horn, organized crime is getting involved. Even terrorist groups are cashing in on rhinos. They are being slaughtered. So we published that with a little bit more alarming title, Collapse of the World's Largest Herbivores in 2015. A key point with the large carnivores and herbivores is that many are at risk of extinction, mostly due to human carnivory. And they're vanishing just as we're learning about their amazing and important ecological effects. Part 3. Let's talk about the bushmeat crisis, and I'll define it. Bushmeat hunting is where wild animals are hunted or trapped mostly in tropical forest countries for their meat, medicine, ornaments, or live trade. There's 2 types of bushmeat hunting. Some of it is subsistence hunting, and another part is this international commercial trade. Subsistence hunting sometimes involves complex issues with food security and hunger. I'm working with Chris Everett. He's a PhD student at Nelson Mandela University. He has decided, as part of his PhD dissertation, to walk for 2 years straight throughout southern part of Africa on these transects, recording everything he observes in his GPS, like the carnivores, the herbivores, the poachers, the plants, the livestock. When he's out in the bush, he can send me messages. This technology called InReach he's able to send me a cryptic message with a map showing his location. So here's his little arrow where he's located in Limpopo National Park at this point. This is a people's park where people are living in the park, right next to Kruger National Park, where there are no people living in it. This is what Chris is finding. These are the photos he sends back. These wires are used as snares to trap the animals. Here's an example of a buffalo that was caught in a snare. Once the animals are poached, the meat is laid out in the sun to dry. Here's an example of an elephant he ran across. Elephant are killed for meat, but also, and maybe mostly, for their ivory, the tusks. The ivory is used for trinkets, jewelry, statuettes. He has these camera traps set up to take pictures of the wildlife as the wildlife approaches the camera. But he showed me this picture that he also got of the poachers. They walk into Kruger during the day to try to get an expensive rhino. If they are unable to shoot a rhino, they walk back in the evening, and on their way home, they just kill an elephant because they want to get the tusks. These poachers got an elephant on the way home late in the day. This one's carrying an AK-47 machine gun. Here, Chris maps out on this aerial map of the watering hole the line of snares that they set in the idea of intercepting any animal that walks towards the watering hole. Here are more of the snares and some leg hold traps. In parts of Africa, domestic livestock are abundant, but not regularly consumed for subsistence, and instead kept as a means for storing wealth and a status symbol. So a lot of times people will not kill their own livestock, which they're herding, but will go out in the bush and kill bushmeat, wild animals instead, because that's free. It's not part of their own collection. So what happens to this bushmeat? It gets shipped all over the world. There's some researchers that found about 270 tons of illegal bushmeat pass through the Paris airport every year. I cannot believe that number, but this is peer-reviewed science. They sampled luggage. And this is an example of what they found in one piece of luggage, these two primates. Customs found that. Bushmeat contact causes emerging and re-emerging infectious diseases in humans. Contact with the bodily fluids provides what's called zoonotic diseases, transferring from wild animals to humans. And it's also found from livestock to humans. But in this case, with the bushmeat, AIDS came from primates, bushmeat. Ebola from primates and bats. SARS from bats. And you can see the work of Dr. Michael Greger, if you're interested in this, on many more examples. Here are some rodents. This is a plate of bats ready to be served up. So what we found, 301 species threatened with extinction due to bushmeat hunting, 118 primates, 88 ungulate species. Ungulates are these large animals that have hooves, 31 bat species, 24 carnivore species. Well, I want to give you a picture of what some of them look like. So here I'm displaying 12 of those 301 animal species that are threatened due to hunting by humans, hunting and consumption of their meat and body parts. For example, this is the pangolin, critically endangered. Its scales are used in traditional medicine. It's highly sought after, very expensive. So we titled this paper, "Are We Eating the World's Mammals to Extinction?" I think we're getting a little bit more dramatic in each paper with our title. So we'll see what the editors say. This one's still in review. Well, this bushmeat crisis happens in the oceans too. On land, the largest animals get killed first, but that's what happens in the oceans, the largest marine species. Eating fish and seafood is another form of human carnivory. Overfishing causes Pacific blue tuna numbers to drop dramatically. Overfishing fears cast aside as Sushi Boss pays $118,000 for a single bluefin tuna. highly endangered, very limited. Loss of marine mammals, mostly due to overfishing, a form of human carnivory. We've lost, compared to historical times, we've lost most of the populations of marine mammals. For example, 90-some% of diadromous fish lost. Diadromous, those are fish that live part of their life at sea and part of their life in fresh water. Example, salmon. Sharks are top predators of the ocean. Very, very important species and very interesting species. Well, they regulate ecosystems, kind of like the gray wolf regulates the terrestrial ecosystem. Here in 1970, sharks at this number of abundance, by the 2000s down to here. As sharks decline, their prey, the rays increase. As rays increase, their prey, the scallops, decline. So you can continue these trophic cascades throughout the marine ecosystem, or, if you prefer, ripple effects. So some good news is one person can change the world. Yao Ming, basketball star for the Houston Rockets. He took it on himself to do a media campaign to stop the use of sharks and shark fins for making soup. Here he says, refuse to eat shark fin soup. Thanks to Yao Ming, killing sharks for their fins is down 50%. So a key point on the bushmeat crisis is that land and marine mammals and other animals are being overharvested and eaten by humans. Well, let's move on to a less depressing topic, climate change. I'm just wondering what this couple is talking about in the Arctic sunbathing. Well, I'm from Oregon, and as you know, it rains a lot in Oregon. So how can you explain Detroit Reservoir without hardly any water in it? This is the boat dock, and there's the water level. So it's not just California that has the drought. We're suffering in Oregon too. Well, let's look at the number of days in Portland, Oregon, greater than 80 degrees. This is the number of days per year. In 2011, we got about 45 days greater than 80 degrees. 2012, 13, 14, 15, over 90 days greater than 80 degrees. So I thought it was getting hotter out there in Oregon, but this is dramatic. Now, I must caution you, these are short-term data, and we should look at the long-term when talking about climate change. So let's go for the long term. 2,000 years of record. Carbon dioxide going along hundreds and hundreds of years, and all of a sudden in recent times it skyrockets. These are the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Methane, same thing, going along and recently increases dramatically. The same with nitrous oxide. Carbon dioxide is the most abundant greenhouse gas. We hear a lot about CO2, but the second most abundant one is methane, and that's what I'm going to focus on today. We don't hear much about methane, but large cuts in carbon dioxide alone will not abate climate change. Methane has a much shorter lifespan in the atmosphere. It's about 9 years, where carbon dioxide maybe 100 years in the atmosphere, maybe more. So if we think about methane, we have the potential for more rapid reductions for climate change and mitigation. Well, let's talk about methane and ruminants. So what are ruminants? They're animals, they're mammals that acquire nutrients from plants by fermenting them in their specialized stomachs. Then they belch the methane out during this process. Livestock examples are cattle, sheep, goats, ruminants. Every cow gives off about 100 pounds of methane per year. Well, so let's look at the data on the methane and see how big of a deal it is. Well, the largest human-caused source of methane emissions is ruminant livestock. Number one source. Let's look on the y-axis here. We have carbon equivalents, emissions. And on the x-axis, ruminants, natural gas, landfills, biomass, burning, coal, and rice. This can be mitigated by using drier cultivation techniques. So these ruminants, mostly cattle, goats, and sheep, the number one source for methane emissions caused by humans. So let's look at those ruminants that are causing that methane emission situation. In 1960, about 2.4 billion ruminants on the planet. Today, between 3 and 4 billion. Let's take a look at individual food types and see how they contribute to greenhouse gas emissions. On this axis here, we have carbon equivalents, again, per kilogram of food product. Here, we have each of the food types. The ruminants are in red. The non-ruminants are in blue. See how much higher the ruminant animals are in emissions than the non-ruminant animal products? Just look at that for a minute. So on the very right side of the graph are two plant products. These are much lower than even the non-ruminant animal products. So if you're interested in a low greenhouse gas footprint, go for the plant products in your diet. So we published that in 2014 saying that greenhouse gas emissions from ruminant meat are significant. Reductions could make substantial contributions to climate change mitigation goals and yields important social and environmental co-benefits. So I'm going to come back to this co-benefit thing with social and environmental. We wrote in this article just a couple of lines about policy, saying that implementing a tax or emission trading scheme on livestock's greenhouse gas emissions could be an economically sound policy that would modify consumer prices and affect consumption patterns. Well, the press got a hold of that. The Huffington Post, The Guardian, Forbes. Forbes' headline was, "A meat tax. Seriously?" But when that article came out, Richard Branson, the owner of Virgin Airlines, saw this graph. I didn't think any celebrity read my scientific papers. And he can put out a press release saying that he is not going to eat beef the rest of his life because of the greenhouse gas emissions. He's the owner of Virgin Airlines, very concerned. But I think that's a very good start for Richard. But if any of you know him, you might want to encourage him to go a little further. Have you seen that bumper sticker, "Got water"? But dairy also has environmental and climate impacts. They're higher than plants, but lower than meat. This is a poster about the UN urging a global move to meat and dairy-free diets. So I'm interested in preserving all life on Earth. Saving the world? Well, because Earth's climate may be near tipping points to catastrophic change, the need to act is increasingly pressing. Let's take a look at Arctic sea ice down here on the bottom. September 1984, the maximum summer extent of sea ice shown in white in the Arctic. By 2012, the maximum extent of summer sea ice is exactly 50% what it was in 1984. So climate change is accelerating beyond scientific expectations. Deforestation is a major cause of climate change because of the loss of carbon that's stored in the trees. A major reason for tropical deforestation is the clearing of trees for feed crops and pastures. So here's the human carnivory related to the forests again. The most carbon in trees is stored in the Amazon, the Congo Basin, and Southeast Asia. Especially in the Amazon, there is a lot of clearing of forest for making livestock pastures and for growing feed crops. This is very expensive in terms of greenhouse gases because those trees need to stay there to store the carbon. Let's look at the crops around the world. The green ones are used for food. The purple ones are used mostly for livestock feed, sometimes fuel. So sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, mostly growing their crops to feed themselves, plant-based foods. United States and especially Europe, most of those crops go to feeding livestock. In the United States alone, livestock feed makes up 67% of all the cropland in the United States, 2/3. Human food, 25%, biofuel, 6%. This is a very low efficiency, as you know, in terms of bringing calories from the earth to humans when you pass it through the livestock. Let's look at the Earth's land mammals by weight. Each little square is 1 million tons. The black squares in the middle is the summed weight of all the humans in the world. That's how much we weigh. Well, this is how much all the cattle weigh in the world over here, and all the pigs, and the goats, and the sheep, and the horses. So the wild land mammals are shown in green squares. So they're represented just on the edges here on the green. Elephants get 1 square. So just a couple of centuries ago, this graph would have been reversed, where there would be more wild mammals than humans and livestock. So this is a rapid change in planet Earth. Well, let's just look at 3 time periods on the same theme. On this y-axis here is the estimated global mass. And let's look at the different categories, but focus on this. 1900 is the year yellow, the year 2000 red, and the year 2050 projections in green. So wild land mammals, yellow to red, and there are no projections for 2050. Humans went from this much mass, total weight on planet Earth, to this much and projected to go this high by 2050. Cattle from here to here to here. All livestock from here to here to here. So this matches what we're seeing in that previous map. Human population is expected to go to over 9 billion by 2050. Meat production expected to go over 450 million tons of meat per year. This is a big problem here. So environmentally, if we could just get these curves down, especially this one, and eat lower on the food chain, it would do wonders for multiple systems. Okay, let's try this livestock counter. My grad student, Chris Wolf, and I, we just made this a couple of weeks ago. These are global livestock numbers, and these are the ruminants. This is real time coming from the internet right now. Cattle, buffalo, goats, and sheep make up this line. Well, I said it was less than 4 billion when I did that research. Now it's over 4 billion ruminants. This is how fast it's changing. The counter is spinning forward. This is like that national debt counter. You've seen those. A billion pigs spinning a little slower. That's because there's 4 different types of livestock here and just 1 here. Chickens, I can't even count that fast with 21 billion. These data come from the FAO, and so these are their own numbers, and we made this model to have real-time internet coverage of global livestock numbers. Okay, thanks. Okay, go to the next slide. So when I see those chicken numbers at 22 billion, and then I read in The Guardian, will the worst bird flu outbreak in the US history finally make us reconsider factory farming chicken? Something to ponder. All those chickens, I'm just thinking of the potential for these big pandemics that Dr. Greger's predicting. Well, since we did livestock, let's do methane. Okay, let's try the methane counter. So, these are our 4 billion ruminants, the same ticking. And we know that the ruminants give off this methane. So here is the change in methane emissions in metric tons per year. So in every 10 or 12 seconds, we've just ratcheted up by 1 more ton per year of methane emissions from livestock on planet Earth. Now my hope is that sometime we can recalibrate this model and get this spinning the opposite direction. So go tell your friends on what it takes to get these lower emissions. Okay, thanks. During this hour presentation today, 64,000 livestock are being added to the planet. These are FAO data, 13,000 ruminants, 1,000 pigs, 50,000 chickens. What we're working on now has this little slogan. It's called Beans for Beef. Substituting beans for beef in the American diet can deliver almost half of the U.S. climate change mitigation target for 2020. Now, if people say what I eat doesn't affect climate change, that is nonsense. We currently have this in review at a journal, Substituting Beans for Beef as a Contribution to U.S. Climate Change Targets. So let's see how the editors react when they see this. We continue to ask the questions, what might be the major reasons people might not want to swap beans for beef in their diets? Well, it could be taste preferences, protein worries, old habits. Well, the answer is fear of intestinal gas. Well, then we ask, what's the bigger fear? Intestinal gas from eating beans or catastrophic climate change? Are you ready for the answer? No, I'm not either. But we can go to Dr. Greger again, who wrote, intestinal gas is normal and healthy. And then 2 gastroenterologists that specialize in intestinal gas wrote, perhaps increased tolerance of flatus would be a better solution. And we have to listen to this because it's written by Drs. Fardy and Sullivan. Actually, intestinal gas is typically not much of a problem, as you know, for those who consistently eat beans. Well, in terms of part 4, climate change, reducing ruminant livestock populations could globally reduce climate change, significantly mitigating climate change. Part 5, back to Oregon, Heart Mountain National Wildlife Refuge. All the cattle were removed from the refuge in 1990. This is a natural experiment for us researchers. Heart Mountain is located southern Oregon on the Nevada border. We asked the question, can we reverse ecosystem damage by removing livestock? If so, could we restore biodiversity? Will you be the judge? We have before and after pictures. 1990 with cattle along this stream, 2013 without cattle. See the big growth of willows along the stream? You remember from Yellowstone how important willows along the stream are for the birds and the other wildlife? 1987 with cattle, 2013 without. Here the channel is getting filled with sedges and grasses. This is what we want to see. We want to see so much vegetation on these small streams you can't even see the water. Again, 1988 with cattle along this stream, 2013 without cattle. Look at the willow flush along that stream. 1988, there was sagebrush growing in the floodplain. The stream was incised from downcutting erosion. The water table lowered. the dry plants move in, the sagebrush. This reversed itself with the removal of cattle. The water table's now higher, and we have these lovely floodplain plants growing, and the sagebrush is gone in this example. We found 74% decrease in eroding banks after the removal of cattle, 400% increase in willow, 1,000 increase in aspen, up to 133% increase in bird abundance was found by researchers at Heart Mountain National Wildlife Refuge. Okay, can we have this clip? I'm going to take you to Heart Mountain so we can hike around there for the next 2 minutes.
The only thing the managers did was remove the cattle. And then we just stand back and watch what happens. Aspen and willows are streamside biodiversity indicators. These woody plants connect with the birds you can hear, the understory shrubs and flowers. It's just incredible to see this. When the cattle were here in these meadows, the aspen would stay about this tall. They would be eating the small branches and the leaves. All the cattle were removed in 1990, and then we got this incredible flush of aspen here. So we have these young ones that are less than 25 years old, and then in contrast, we have these very large old ones that are just on their way out. This is about a 70-centimeter diameter aspen tree. Originated in the 1800s, before livestock arrived on Heart Mountain. This one here is 2.2 centimeters diameter. This came in about 10 years ago. We've taken some photographs since the cows have come off and compared those to what the willow looked like with the cows on the refuge, and it's just night and day. Just an incredible flush of willow and aspen all through this streamside area. It's quite a spectacle to see how nature can recover if it's just left on its own, how it can restore itself.
That was a video made by Trip Jennings, a colleague of mine. So, now that we're back from Heart Mountain, let's look at how Heart Mountain fits in with the American West. What's shown in brown on this map are all the federal grazing allotments in the American West. So that's over half of the American West is grazed by livestock, and with similar effects that we saw in Heart Mountain. But the livestock is still throughout the vast majority of these areas. So in terms of restoration, there's great potential with removing livestock from a lot of these other areas. Right here is the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge, illegally occupied by militants until 2 days ago. Ranchers are out. They want more control over these lands from the federal government. I'm sure you heard about them in the news. Well, we just published this study in Environmental Management in the year 2015. A key point about Heart Mountain is ecosystem restoration can happen naturally, passively, if we remove the cattle. Let's move on to the last topic, environmental nutrition. Defined? It's the interrelationships between our food choices, our environment, and our health. After we published that carnivore study in Science magazine, Brian Machevina and Kenneth Feely wrote a response. They said, Ripple et al. Claim that meat consumption by humans is one of the many threats to carnivores and biodiversity. We argue that human carnivory is in fact the single greatest threat to overall biodiversity. Now that is one major statement. meat eating is the biggest threat in the world to biodiversity. So I called Brian Muchavina. I didn't know him. We talked, and then we talked some more on the phone. Then we started collaborating on human carnivory, how it affects bushmeat hunting, pasture creation, grazing, intensive livestock production, feed crop cultivation. Then there's all these indirect effects. The blue ones all have to do with climate change. The indirect effects shown in green are non-climate change effects. So the cascades and the types of impacts are huge. Lots of different types. Soil loss. Remember the trophy cascades? We didn't even get to the water issues. Well, we also added humans into the mix. Human carnivory affects human diseases, as you know, heart disease, stroke, cancer, obesity. And with 900 million hungry people in the world, it can affect food security. Well, we just finished publishing this in 2015. So we made the bold title, Biodiversity Conservation. The key is reducing meat consumption. Let's continue on with this topic of environmental nutrition. Remember the definition? On the y-axis, percent relative to meat eaters, the vegan diet, the lacto-ovo vegetarian diet, and the meat eater diet. So as we increase animal products in the diet, hypertension increases. As we increase animal products in the diet, diabetes increases. As we increase animal products in the diet, greenhouse gas emissions increase. When we put them all together, look how similar the diet effects are on health and climate. Well, my colleague Hans Diehl is illustrating here deadly plaque buildup from cholesterol in the arteries. So I think of these arteries as streams in the body. Dr. Esselstyn's angiograms? Well, we saw these earlier. The narrowed one, I think this is for Joe. Yeah? Joe's angiogram in 96, Western diet. Nice and wide here, 99, 3 years later, a plant-based diet. 1990, a stream on Heart Mountain with cattle. 2013, without. So, streams in the body, reversing coronary damage by removing livestock from the diet. Streams on the landscape, reversing ecosystem damage by removing livestock. This is called passive restoration of human health and planetary health. Human health without drugs or surgery. Ecosystem health without plantings or engineering. I think a very important thing to do now is for the ecologists and the nutrition health experts to start working together on these things about the co-benefits of plant-based diets on both human and planetary health. There's been very little done across these disciplines collaboration-wise. So I want to say that I'm interested in brainstorming with anybody here or watching remotely on this topic. Let's move forward on it. Well, from a cow's point of view, we feel really guilty. The fat in beef and dairy is killing you people by the millions. We think it'd be best if we go our separate ways. So in summary, it's simple. Diets that are good for the person are good for the planet. So I asked the question, as a researcher, I'm never done. Are vegan diets becoming more popular? Well, I asked this of Google searches for the last 10 years. So what do you think? Let's take a look. Vegan The searches on the word vegan are shown in red on this graph, 2005, fairly flat till 2011, and then eventually going exponential increases. Searches throughout the whole world on the word vegan. The blue one is the searches on the word vegetarian, flat. Look at how much more popular the searches on vegan are. And I'm very encouraged about this exponential increase. Now these, Google doesn't give out their raw data, so these are all just relative amounts, but they're still very impressive. So I'm still not done. I want to ask another question. What's the US distribution of Google searches on the word vegan? Let's do the same 10-year period. Now, when you see your home state, keep an eye on it and see how it's doing. I'm watching South Dakota and Oregon. Now, you can probably imagine the differences there. The darker blue means more searches on vegan. 2005. Or darker gray, whatever your color is. 2007. These are the yearly searches on the word vegan. 2009. Yeah. 2010. 2011. 2012. 2013. We're getting there. 2014. Come on, South Dakota. 2015. Oh, we didn't quite make it. Well, we have more work to do. But the good news is people are becoming more aware of vegan diets. It's obvious with the Google data. So my hope is for more awareness of the environmental effects of human diets. Because awareness is needed before we can get more action. So with that, I want to say that we have these converging environmental crises that we've been hearing about. So let's all work together for the sake of the grandchildren. Thank you.